In this chapter, we'll take a look at a very powerful component in the Kendo UI library called chart. This highly configurable and dynamic component makes data visualization a snap, but because it is so powerful, there are many features and configuration options to consider. We'll start off by taking a look at the anatomy of a Kendo chart. Then we'll dive right in and add a chart to the RPS dashboard as per the new requirements for visualization. We'll configure the chart from its simplest form to more complex dynamic configuration options with inline components and directives. The Kendo chart is highly configurable and highly customizable. While all the configuration options are available in the docs website, let's take a look at some of the major ones now, and then the ones we'll be using in our project. When you go to the components documentation, under charts, you'll see the different types of charts available as part of the charts package that we're going to install. You have your chart, a sparkline, which is an inline element, and a stock chart. In this chapter, we're looking at the chart element, so let's dig into that. A chart itself has many different parts. The base element is the Kendo chart itself. If we take a look at the source code of this example, you'll see that that's the root element. A Kendo chart element can define all the different properties right in line, and you can get a fully functional chart just by using this one element. But sometimes you need a little bit more control. So inside of every Kendo chart, you have the ability to add inner elements that control different aspects of the chart. And it looks like this. Inside the Kendo chart, we would just drop in a title element. We can give it text. We can control its look and feel as well. A very important element is the series element. If we take a look at the series, this is the part that actually controls the data itself. And series can have many different types of charts. A series can be specified as a bullet chart, a pie chart, a column and bar chart. We're going to be looking at an example of one of these in this chapter. Let's take a look at a bubble chart. This is what a bubble chart would look like. Think of series as the actual array of data that you're going to be plotting along the X and Y axis. And there can be multiple series on each chart. If you take a look at the area type series, here's an example of multiple series. They're all on this one chart, and there's 3 defined series in this one. A Kendo chart series item is an element that defines one of these series, and it can define the color, the type of graphical representation, such as column or line, spacing, and other properties. Along the bottom in this example, you see months listed. These are the chart categories. So if we go back to chart here, you can see that the categories is defined here, and the categories is years in this example. Categories can be anything. It's whatever is running along the x-axis. However, if categories are detected to be date objects, those are treated specially by the Kendo chart, and dates are arranged chronologically and automatically. This is exactly what we'll be doing in this chapter, so you'll see a good example of this. And that's a brief introduction to the anatomy of a chart. It's better to learn this by doing, so let's add a chart to our RPS application and implement it. Let's move on to getting the chart module installed and add it to our application. On the dashboard page of our application, we have this issues section. Down here is where we're going to place our chart. Let's have a look at the code. Open up source, modules, dashboard, pages, and then dashboard page. If we scroll down, all the way down to all issues, right here is where we want to place our chart. But since in React we mainly deal with components, this is a good opportunity to create a separate component just for our chart. Under dashboard, in the components folder, I'm going to create a new file called dashboard-chart.tsx. Here, let's export a function called dashboard chart. And for now, let's just return a bit of TSX. We'll return a div with the word chart inside of it, just so that we can visualize it. And this is the name of the component. So let's go back to the dashboard page, and we're going to use that component right in here. And there's our component on our dashboard page. The next step is getting the actual chart components installed. And under the charts getting started section, let's find that installation instruction. Here it is. Let's copy this. And on the terminal, I'm going to terminate the currently running process and run the installation, just as we always have done. And when that's finished, run npm start to kick things off again. Great. Now that we have our chart packages installed, we can go back to the chart component and do our imports. So let's import chart. Now let's simply replace this div with our new chart component. Do you remember that title element? Well, that's also going to be available here. In fact, when I start typing chart, you can see that Visual Studio Code is helping me out here. And all the different chart classes are coming up here. These are all coming from KendoReact charts, and they're all ways that are available to control the look of your chart. We're going to be touching upon just a few of these. Here's chart title. Let's add that in here with some text, and I'm going to call this active issues. Chart title, by the way, is automatically imported for me right here. If it does not automatically import for you, just add chart title and other components we'll need for the chart in the imports. All right, I'm going to save this and let's head out to our application. And you can see that we already have a chart that's being rendered. It's empty right now because we haven't defined any series yet, but we are getting a chart and it has a title, active issues. All right, now that we have our basic chart set up and working, let's get some data in there next. Our dashboard chart component that we've created is going to contain the Kendo chart. And for the most part, we're going to be building things out here within the parent chart component. However, there is one thing we need to do in the dashboard page component, and that's to provide the data. Since the dashboard chart component is a presentation only component, we're not going to be fetching the data in the dashboard chart component. We're going to be fetching the data in the dashboard page component. I'm going to go through this rather quickly in this lesson. You can follow along, or if you're only interested in the chart specific UI elements and not the data part or how we get the data, then you can skip to the next lesson. All right, let's get that data and provide it to the chart. So we're going to be working in the dashboard page component. And up here, we're currently showing only the status counts that's visible over here. These are the numbers that we're showing, the active issues, closed issues, and open issues. And we're fetching that from the backend via the dashboard service and get status counts function. But at the same time, we also want to fetch the data for the chart. That's also available in the dashboard service as a different function. That one's called get filtered issues. If we look at the dashboard service, here's get status counts, and here's get filtered issues. Both of them take in the dashboard filter. One returns a status counts object, and one returns a filtered issues object. We're going to be using use queries, and that's coming from a third-party package called React Query. That's beyond the scope of this course, but you can check that out. It's a very useful tool for fetching data from APIs. It has a lot of common functionality built into it, like retry, for example. So use queries is going to resolve when both of the queries are actually satisfied. One query for status counts and one query for filtered issues. Now, this is where we actually get the results. We have query results and call use dashboard data, passing in the filter. Results is an array and it's going to have both the status counts and the filtered issues. So let's separate query results into its individual components. One is going to be query results sub 0 and the other one is going to be query results sub 1. Now query result has a data object on it like we've done before, but now we're going to be casting it. Status counts is currently unknown, but we know that status counts is going to be of type status counts. And we know that filtered issues is going to be query result 1.data as filtered issues. I know this might be a bit much, especially if you don't know React Query, but stick with me here if you're not familiar with this, and you'll see how filtered issues gets used. And let's go down to where we are hosting our dashboard chart component. This is where we need to pass in our filtered issues that we fetch. We want to create a prop on dashboard chart, and we'll call it issues all, and we'll pass in our filtered issues here. Now we want to do that only when filtered issues is not null. And the way we can do that in JSX is just say filtered issues, $, and then render that dashboard chart. So this will only render the chart after this Boolean is evaluated and filtered issues is true, or truthy, I should say. You know how JavaScript goes. So we need issues all as a prop in dashboard chart. Let's head over to dashboard chart. Right at the top here, I'm going to create the prop types and import filtered issues. Okay. There's our type, and we want this to be passed in as props, which is going to be dashboard chart props. Now we don't have any complaints here on the dashboard page. In fact, we're done with that page, so the rest of the work is here. Once we get those props in here with the filtered issues, we somehow need to maintain those issues within this dashboard chart component. You can use state here, but a warning about that is that if you use internal state to this component, you're going to be doing a lot of unnecessary re-renders. One way you can avoid that is to only initialize the categories and the item opened by month and the items closed by month, is to only initialize the data that you're going to be getting in one time. We're going to be using the useMemo hook from React in order to accomplish that. Let me paste in the preparation code so you don't have to watch me type it all out, and I will explain it. Okay, and I'm going to import useMemo from React. That's a React native hook right there. Init categories. These are going to be the dates on the x-axis of our chart. So if we take a look at the finished application and scroll down to where the chart is, these right here at the bottom of the chart are our months. And we're going to actually force a conversion to date objects so that the Kendo chart automatically treats these as date objects. So the date range will be laid out chronologically across the x-axis here. And we're pulling those out of the props, issues all, which is filtered issues, and then categories. Categories are coming in as dates from the backend. That's init categories. Then we have closed issues and open issues. The closed issues are represented with green and open issues are represented with red. And these are just integers that are a count. So we have a number of open issues and a number of closed issues, and we're pulling them out from the props, issues all, items, and then we're filtering them by open and by closed. Now, these are the actual objects that we're going to be binding to in our chart. So if we look at categories here, it's a date array. If we look at items open by month, it's a number array. And items closed by month is also a number array. Now, we could write it this way. So for example, categories, let's call it categories 1, and we can say init categories. This will yield the same result, date array, but you're going to have that re-rendering issue because we're going to be reinitializing categories even if they didn't change. So when we use the useMemo hook from React, it's going to call init categories, get the dates out from the data, but it's going to only do it if the categories changes. And that's what the second parameter to useMemo is doing. It's letting us know that only when categories changes, that's when we reinitialize categories from the data that's coming in. And similarly, we're doing the same thing for items open by month and items closed by month. All right, so that takes care of the data flow. But how do we actually render the data in the chart? We have our data being delivered to the dashboard chart component. So now all we really need to do is worry about the UI part, and that's the chart. This is the fun part, right? The chart is currently not displaying any data, as we've seen. In order for the chart to display any data whatsoever, we need to define a series. What's a series? Well, if we go into chart here and then elements, you'll see series here. So this is an element. It's a sub-element of chart, and it gives us a way to render the data that we have in different ways. So we can select a type for a series, and the series or the data will render either as a bar or column chart, or as a bubble chart like that, or as a line chart. If we look at the code here, you'll see that we have the data, and we need to define a chart series element inside of our chart, and then at least one chart series item with the data. So let's do that. If you want to try this yourself, your data is already there. Go ahead and try this, pause the video, and come back when you're done. So the first thing we need to add here is a chart series. This component contains child chart series item components, and there could be multiple chart series items. Our chart is going to have two because we want to show open items and we want to show closed items. Let's do one of them for now. Our chart series item is going to have a data attribute, which is going to be bound open by months. Let's see what that looks like. All right, back on the app, you can see that we are getting some data in here. That's great. You can even test that the filtering is working. And there we go. It sure is. Perfect. So there's a couple of things missing here. Our x-axis is missing. We don't know what is represented along that axis. Our closed issues are missing. So we're going to fix all that. Remember when I said that we have different types of renderings? So the type of chart series item can be changed right here. By default, we have a bar chart, but if I use the IntelliSense here, you can see the types that are available. Let's say I can pick a line chart here, for example. And if we take a look, you can see that now our series is rendered as a line chart. I'm going to copy this chart series item and duplicate it on the next line. So now I want to show the items closed by month. Now we have two sets of data that we're displaying. There we go. We have our open items and we have our closed items. Well, what happens if I don't want to keep defining what type to display each series item with? Because that's being redundant. Well, there's a special element we can use that allows us to set some defaults for the chart, and that's called chart series defaults. So I can define the chart series defaults element, and I can set the type right here, and this time I'm going to select column. So I don't need to specify the type of line or the type of column inside each one of these chart series items. Now I've defined it globally, and that's what our chart looks like now. Well, this is also looking kind of messy, especially if I start filtering, and we want to have some kind of comparison view that takes up less space horizontally. So I'm going to convert this to stacked series items, and that way each series can be stacked on one another. And I can define that globally as well using stack equals true. I can also specify a gap. This just gives a little bit of styling, and it specifies the amount of space we can leave between each bar. There we go. So now each bar is very close to each other. That's the 0.06, and our items are stacked. Our filtering is still working. Great. For my open items, I can specify the color in line just like this using CSS styling color names. I can even use hex here, so that's what I'm going to do. For the open issues, I want this reddish color, and for the closed issues, I want this greenish color. And I also want them to be slightly see-through, so I'm going to set the opacity to be 0.7 on each one. Let's take a look. Okay, there we go. Now we can immediately see which are the closed issues, because now we're using green for the closed issues up here and in the chart, and we're using red for the open issues up here and in the chart, and it's the same color. We still need to do a little bit of work here with the x-axis, and that's the category axis. We'll do that next. Well, our chart is looking pretty good, but we're not binding the chart categories at all. So we have no way of knowing what's along the x-axis. We are getting the categories back with our data, so let's use them. The Kendo chart has a special subcomponent called chart category axis. Let's define that. The chart category axis can contain multiple chart category axis items. We're only going to have one based on dates, so I'm going to bind the categories attribute right to the categories in our state. Remember, our categories is just an array of dates, and Kendo chart automatically figures out how to use those dates and how to distribute them. Let's take a look. Okay, look at that. I didn't even have to specify how to display the categories, but it automatically figured out that we want to display them as dates, and we want to display them sequentially based on the lowest date available, according to the data, and on the newest. If I take a look at some other filters and see how that affects the categories, which is good, but we still have the category labeled, and we have the last 3 months. 6 months, there we go, and 1 year. Now I'm pretty happy with the way the chart looks at the moment. One thing I want to do is get rid of some of these grid lines here. I think it's a bit too much. The category axis item allows us to control what we see. So it has some styling attributes that we can use. One of them is called major grid lines. And if I set major grid lines visible property to false, you can see that now we're only getting horizontal lines, which looks a lot cleaner, at least in my opinion. What else can we do here with each of the category axis items? Well, we have our labels that we can control that are being generated. So if we want to control the labels, we have a few options here. One of the properties is rotation, and I can set that to a number like 30 degrees, for example. And I can set a margin. So a margin can be, for example, I want to move the labels a little bit down. So I can set its top attribute to 20 pixels. So this will move the margin down, and it'll rotate the labels by 30 degrees. And this is what it looks like. We would rotate the labels if our labels were a little bit too long, for example, or if there were so many labels here that they wouldn't fit. In fact, there's a setting for that. Instead of using a specified number of degrees for rotation, we can set the rotation to be automatic. So if the chart detects that the labels won't fit, it'll automatically slant them to the appropriate angle, which is really nice. So in this case, we're showing a year's worth of data here, but our labels fit just fine. However, if we were to switch from months to weeks, not all the labels might fit. There's a property that we can change, and that's called base unit. So the base unit of chart category axis item is set to months right now, but we can set that to all these different options, including weeks. And we can do that dynamically if we need to, of course. So if I set this to weeks and I hard code it, you can see that now we have weeks down at the bottom axis. And you can see that our rotation worked automatically to display the labels at 90 degrees. If I set this to 3 months, there's our weeks. 1 year, there's our list of weeks. I'm going to set this back to months. So we've only begun to scratch the surface of what can be possible with a chart. There are many different types of chart series available that you can try, and many more different settings that you can use. One really fun one to play with is to change the default series to a pie chart. And that gives you a nice little pie chart here that animates as you filter. I don't exactly know the usefulness of a pie chart, but it looks nice on presentations. Let's set this back to column. So we've completed the chart requirement and the dashboard requirement that RPS Tracker version 2 specified. And you can see how easy it was for us to implement using the Kendo chart.